Hey, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am here today with, as usual, Nate.
How y'all doing?
And we are joined today by Ben Zwycky. Um,
Hello.
and we are coming together to discuss Rudyard Kipling's poem, The City of Brass. Um, Two notes before we get started. Um, First, although it is not his book, Mr. Zwycky has contributed to a book that's being published. Is it out yet,
No,
or is
it's
it
it's
coming?
gonna be out in May. I didn't contribute other than correcting the language side of things, but
I mean, but
everyone else did the fact checking. So
you helped it come to publication.
yeah,
It's called Trial at Moscow.
no
Is that correct?
judgment in Moscow.
Judgment in Moscow, and it is a book about the Nuremberg-style trials for the crimes of communism of the Soviet Union that were supposed to take place but never did, and how it's kind of a tragedy that that did not happen. So,
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's one of the main thrusts of the book. Yeah.
and so I'm going to put I'll put a link to that below if he can furnish me with one. So if you're interested in that, which sounds like a fascinating and disturbing topic,
It is.
and and second note, if you enjoy my work, you can also support me via www.subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great. That link will also be below, and I would appreciate any contributions there. Um, Having said that, um, well, one more note from myself before I open it up. The first poem I did on this channel was Rudyard Kipling's "The Gods of the Copybook Headings," which I first heard about by way of Bill Whittle.
Me too.
And it's a fascinating and kind of horrifying poem. And then a couple months ago, someone, one of my subscribers, actually requested this poem, and I looked it up, and it's kind of the same basic idea, but Kipling apparently decided to take the gloves off this time, and
In case
so
you weren't aware, there were gloves in the Gods of the Copybook headings.
yes, I didn't think there were, but yeah, you're like, then you read this one, you're like, oh, he was being gentle then.
Yeah, or maybe he didn't have gloves on before, and he put Freddy Krueger gloves on for this one.
Yeah, another way. So, having prefaced this with that, Ben, what's your first impression? What's the first thing you want to comment on about this poem?
Well, just how prophetic it is, really. The way he's predicted how devastating these types of policies are, the socialist disintegration of society, how they've not modern social justice warriors for one thing. This poem was written in the start of the 20th century, way before the Russian Revolution. Like how could he know? I mean, it's just amazing.
That is one thing that's fascinating me, because like I look at this and I see like so much of this playing out in such fidelity, and I'm like, what was he looking at? Like there has to have been something that he looked back at that told him this is what's going to happen, and I don't know what that was.
It could be the French Revolution, because that was pretty horrible, and that was based on similar sorts of ideas of throwing down the old order, giving mob rule, giving in the demands of the whoever demanded the most gets to rule over the rest, and horrific things that happened during the French Revolution. I think another possibility might be the start of the American settlement, when they tried socialism and nearly starved to death.
Yeah, it's not unlikely he knew about that. Yes. Nate, go
I
ahead.
don't know.
You could also look back to sort of the fall of Rome, where they like had to, they diluted their borders, they weakened their defense, and in the end, they said that all you need to keep them happy is bread and circuses. But that's because all the government could afford to do was keep the population quiescent while they got conquered by outside forces.
Yeah, it is a pattern that has repeated throughout history, but they're just trying to think of the more modern examples that would have sprung to mind. Suppose the classical example would have been because he's an educated man, not like today. We have people forgetting the classics. The fall of the Roman Empire would have been taught to everybody, wouldn't it? So.
Yeah, and and that's also, what was Recessional? That was another of the poems that Nate and I talked about. Another poem by Rudyard Kipling, and there's this what's the term I'm looking for? Something that the poem a couple lines the poems returns to. I can't. There's a word for it, but I'm not finding it right now. But it says, lest we forget, lest we forget. And when I was working on that one, it just like I got to that part, and it just was a punch to the gut because we have so much has just been lost and forgotten, and it didn't have to be.
Well, the worst part is it's not lost. It's just no one cares. I mean, it's all right here at our fingertips. We can go look at it if we wanted to. But
yeah,
do we?
But it
uncomfortable knowledge is the worst kind. That's very difficult to keep going when it's something you don't want to hear. That's the most difficult thing to teach people is what they don't want to hear.
Well, and the other thing with that is it was understood that was the goal of an education, was to pass on these kind of things, to pass on the deeds of your ancestors and history, and now
and to sort of inculcate culture in the next generation. I mean, culture is not inborn; culture is taught.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, if you do not teach your kids the beliefs and the sort of hallowed knowledge of your people's past, you're not going to have a culture for very long. You're going to have something, but it ain't going to be the culture you wanted.
Yeah,
it's going to be somebody else's or just some chaotic mass of silliness.
It was it's getting a little more directly back to the poem. It's kind of funny looking at some things in here, like how clearly we can see some of these parts playing out today. Like the third or fourth stanza. I don't. Let me see. Actually, I can have exactly one.
Who has hate in his soul? Who has envied his neighbor? Let him arise and control both that man and his labor. So that's
okay. So the third stanza there, it has, because there was need of more pay for the shouters and marchers, they disbanded in face of their foemen, their yeomen and archers. And it's like, oh, and we have God knows only how much government funding, directly or indirectly going to these protest groups that are producing nothing and creating nothing except confusion and anger, and then they're
vandalism and violence,
and at the very same time, in a lot of cities, because basically of these protest groups, these our actual police are being pulled back, and crime is just skyrocketing, and ordinary people are paying a severe penalty. And it's exactly what he said.
Yeah. Havens of rest for the wastrels where once walked the sentries. Playgrounds of pleasure and leisure with limited entries. That's a sanctuary city, isn't it? So
yeah. Well, that's one of the things that got me, was that they talk about they pulled down the walls, which that's fortification. It's hey, there's a few. There are one, two, maybe a couple of well-defended ways in. It's not easy to get through here. Castles are effective, and then they pulled all that down and built shopping malls effectively, where you could just anybody who wants to can get in and you know, it talks later about like, you know, the sword that was forged while they lied. Like it didn't listen to their denial. You know, how do you think they knew how to forge that sword? How do you think they knew where to ram that sword home? It's because they came in, you know, through one of these mini entrances. You know, they're unwatched. They came in, looked around, and said, "Cool, we know how to kill you now. Thank you." You know,
Yeah,
they found the spot on the dragon's chest where the gems had not trusted him, right?
Well, and the other thing is, you don't have to be literally talking about like physical walls and borders. Those matter. Those matter. But you don't have to be talking about the actual physical walls. You can be talking about like boundaries of behavior. Like, these are things that are okay to do. These are things that will destroy you. These are things that seem harmless at the moment, but build up a pattern of behavior that will tear down the entire society. And there are those walls too, and those walls have been torn down and replaced with havens of rest for the wastrels.
Mm-hmm.
One moment, guys. I'm going to be right back. Go ahead.
Okay. When I was doing research for my first novel, I was looking at the architecture of some European cities. I was doing an alternative history where the European cities still had their main castles, and I saw that in Paris there used to be a massive wall around the whole city, which at some point, I'm not sure when, was torn down and turned into a big street, a big series of parks and streets, like almost literally following this poem. They tore down the walls and made it one big great access way for everybody to come in as freely as they want and just celebrate rather than protect themselves. So I thought that was a quite eerie parallel that I hadn't noticed before. So
yeah,
that was odd. What else is there?
Just sort of this loss of fortitude in general in Western society, I guess. I don't know if it's plagued as much some of the other folks around the world, but Western civilization, has like it's lost its punch. Everybody, it seems like so many of our so-called leadership are like, hey, you know what? Let's all just sort of roll over and let it happen. I read the phrase somewhere that like people are accepting all this intrusions and stuff with the phrase. So they're accepting with supine acquiescence. I was like, that's really the best way I've ever heard somebody say it. Just lie back and let them do it to you. And so, like Sean was saying, all the walls are down. There's no, hey, no, we're right. There's good in this. We've just decided, no, Western civilization is terrible, despite the fact that it's been the single most productive and,
beneficial
helpful thing that humanity's really come across so far.
Yeah.
Well, and that actually reminds me of a line from the. I should put line numbers on these next time. Anyway, a line from the second stanza. They chose themselves prophets and priests of minute understanding, men swift to see done and outrun their extremist commanding. And I think that's kind of funny, and I kind of like what Kipling did there, because minute understanding. There's two ways you could read that line, and it could be like, very detailed, very careful, very concise, knowledge of a particular subject. It could also mean there's very, very little they actually know.
No, I think it's mostly the latter. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Dunning-Kruger effect writ large.
The potential double meaning there though is pretty fun.
Yeah, like obsessed with details, missing the big picture, or knowing nothing at all. Yeah.
It's amazing he managed to, predict Alexandria occasional cortex from 110 years ago. I mean, that's pretty amazing. 11 decades later, and he nailed it right on the head, right on the poor, empty little pug-eyed head.
Well, and it's not just her; it's like the entire, journalistic class today. Basically, almost the entire. There are exceptions, but like there's this, they have gotten everything wrong. Like, most recently with the Mueller report, everything's come out now. they have consistently gotten every single thing wrong for 2 years, and there's not even a moment of, geez, we screwed up. Nothing. Just continuing on.
Some of them were acknowledging, but the vast majority are not. They think they can't afford to back down. They have to double down. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, we already don't trust them. If they admit they're wrong about something we all know they're wrong about, how could, that might damage their credibility further.
Well, but we know, like, just from personal interaction, it's exactly the opposite. If someone is willing to say, oh, geez, I messed up on that, then you can say, okay, you can understand the difference between what you wanted and reality. And maybe I can trust you in the future.
And that shows good faith, like, that they held their position in good faith, that they honestly thought this is the way it was, found out no. And so, like you said, they're willing to admit it. To get back to the poem, though, I think what I enjoyed the most about it is reading it. It has like this very, like, speeding along sort of thing. Like, you can imagine somebody just like walking around, like, gesticulating wildly and like just ranting this, just like, just like it is like one of the single most ranty pieces of anything I've ever read, including numerous rants. I was like, I'm so mad, you fools.
Well, on the subject of, like, high-paced rants, there is, it's not going to be, actually, I'm not going to be posting it until July. I'm trying to get it for July 4th, but there is a, poem I'm working on by Philip Freneau about the American Revolution, which is, I think, will be even more in that style, and that's how I'm going to try to do it. But
there's right at the end of the fourth stanza, said, "Who is irked by the law, though he may not remove it? If he lend us his aid in this raid, we will set him above it. So the robber did judgment again upon such as displeased him. The slayer too boasted his slain, and the judges released him." Like the two-tier justice system that we're seeing across the West. Like, for the protected class, they can do no wrong. For the unprotected class, they can do no right. And
it's anarcho-tyranny is the word I've heard for that. That, like, for and the most prominent example, here in the U.S. Is what do we got? The Kate Steinle, a couple of years ago, was murdered, as far as we know, for no reason. Like, I never heard any description of a motive, just pretty much random violence by an illegal immigrant. And then, basically, because he is an illegal immigrant, as far as I can tell, he had no penalty. No one disputed that he killed her. I've never heard anyone argue that she was not killed by an illegal immigrant. But he's off. He's probably wandering the streets of the United States right now, and God only knows what he's done since.
Yeah, it made me immediately think of Tommy Robinson reporting on the two-tier justice system in England. God.
Yeah. Decades of these foreigners preying upon the English children, English girls, and nothing gets done. But when he is reporting on their trial, they have men on the spot within 10 minutes.
He's got arrested on trumped up charges, like at least double figures number of the times he's been arrested on trumped up charges and subjected to illegal imprisonment, illegal treatment in prison, trying to get him killed by Muslim gangs and things. It's horrific. It makes me scared to go back to England.
Yeah, well, I sometimes wonder if I should be learning.
The rather porous southern border you could probably sneak across. Just saying.
Honestly, I sometimes wonder if I should be learning Polish. I'm not entirely joking.
Yeah, well, Czech is relatively close to Polish, and we're on the border with Poland here, so it's about 3 hours away from us. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you have a sane country within driving within convenient driving distance.
Yeah, well, with this country is relatively good. There are some signs that things are going to get worse, but on the whole, the European madness has passed us by on the most part.
Well, I've actually heard, and I've heard a number of people refer to this, that like Eastern Europe, which like we talked about at the beginning, I mentioned the book, was under the domination of the Soviet Union. Somehow that seems to have inoculated them against the current madness.
Yeah,
and
because they've seen firsthand where those sorts of policies lead, because they've experienced them before. They've seen what happens when you go down that road, so they are less enthusiastic about going down that road again, and they've seen where it starts and where it carries on to. So when the people who bother to remember, and there's still lots of people who have living witnesses to the kind of treatment that was doled out. So that's what I worry. What will happen when that generation dies away? Then are people going to forget?
I feel like it's not an inoculation. It's just sort of like it's a bit of a break.
Yeah. They have personally witnessed the last stanza of this poem.
Yeah.
Honestly,
it reminds me of the minor prophets of the Old Testament a whole lot.
I can see that. I can definitely.
Once you hit Jeremiah, you get into Nahum, Habakkuk, Obadiah, Amos, and all of them fellers. You get back there, and that is some grim reading, because it's remarkably consistent. You people are debauched and terrible, and God. This goes from, you're moving toward the level of debauchery where God will abandon you to your fate among the nations, and He will send judgment on you. But then you're right there. God is getting ready to send judgment. And then there's a couple of them that are like, it is too late for you. Like, even if you repented now, the judgment is coming. So pray to be part of the remnant, repent, and live as faithfully as you can in your exile. And one day God will bring back a remnant to you. But I mean, this is all the same sort of thing. You've perverted morality, you've destroyed every sacred thing. You've broken, every social and sacred contract, and now you're going to fall.
They ran panting in haste to lay waste and embitter forever the well springs of wisdom and strength, which are faith and endeavor.
It also brings to mind the Man for All Seasons, where he says he would give the devil the protection of law, because if he cuts down all the trees and of the law and bypasses the law and gets rid of all the legal protections just to get this one man, then what happens to him when all these legal protections are destroyed? When some other threat comes along, then the wind will blow wherever it goes, and there will be nothing to stop it. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something along those lines.
Lord, you cut down all the laws in England, and you're just the man to do it. Yeah, that's and it's the other thing with that one, because I definitely understand and I agree with the overall idea in that little monologue. I should do that for one of my poems, perhaps, even though I don't think it's in verse, but the other thing with that is, and it's kind of the eternal question with these things, like, there are things that don't make sense, that long term are stupid plans if you're in normal times, but in a crisis, that's what you have to do sometimes. And it's like, how bad have things gotten is the other question that kind of goes with that. are we in a sufficient crisis? And I don't like it's a weird problem to try and figure out, because it's like,
yeah, because there is a danger in resorting to armed uprising that you will be swept up in the violence, and there will be no structures left to build on when the dust dies down. So that's one other thing that point is made in the book of how they managed to form a form of resistance to the Soviet powers that was based on the law, because the Soviet authorities were not obeying their own laws when they were persecuting people, and that was one way in which they managed to defend themselves, not actually avoiding prison or avoiding punishment or persecution, but in setting up the precedent and demonstrating that the authorities were not following their own laws, that they were not legitimate. And it didn't have any immediate benefits to them or their relatives, but over the decades, as they kept consistently basing things on obeying the law, that it came to the point where the people were not just demanding things for themselves. They were demanding changes to the law, demanding a building up of a healthy system rather than just tearing everything down because it's rotten, which is sometimes necessary. But if that's your whole plan, then what's left once you've torn everything down? It's just chaos. And whoever's the strongest and can muster up the strongest mob is going to take over and be a new glorious leader.
Well, and that's the and that's also in the the Declaration of Independence. It says, like, these things shouldn't be done lightly.
Yeah.
But here is why it has to be done. And you have to have, I guess you kind of have to have both of those in mind. Like,
mm-hmm.
we shouldn't resort to these extreme measures easily, but if you're not willing to, if you don't recognize that extremes, may become necessary, you're just the proverbial boiling frog.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
yeah, the revolution has to be not just against something; it has to be for something worthwhile and healthy and achievable.
Well,
and that's what I think a lot of our modern protesters miss. Is they're like, we're against this, we're against that. Okay, what are you for? Pie in the sky. We're for fairy tales and candy that doesn't rot your teeth or make you fat.
Well, and the other thing with that is, they happen, fairly, very close in historical terms. The American Revolution and the French Revolution. You had one that said, okay, we need to break free, but we have all this history, we have these examples, we have these traditions, we need to break free, but we're going to build a system based on that. And the French Revolution said, we need a change, we need to reorient, and everything from the past is done. It is today, this is year one, and nothing from history is going to teach us anything. And so that, I think that's a very big difference between those attitudes.
Yeah, one learned from classical history, one denied all ancient wisdom, denied all human nature, essentially. Denied the fact that human nature doesn't change that much over the thousands of years, and the similar problems will come up.
Nature sucks.
Yeah.
We're not fuzzy, cuddly, happy little creatures here. We're kind of nasty, pretty mean, generally selfish critters. And that's something that the West used to understand, and our laws weren't predicated on the idea that we're going to make new people. It's that we're going to deal with people as they are and do the best that we and they can do. And so we ended up with pretty decent laws. But now we're like, no, everybody's a good person. It's just society makes them bad. If society is made of good people, how then does society produce bad people?
That's the one that I've never been able to.
My mustache at it.
That's the one I've never been able to square. It's okay, people are inherently good, and society corrupts them. Well, how did this corrupted society made of inherently good people, corrupting society arise from inherently good people? That makes no sense.
It's evil wizard did it.
Now, hold on now. But what the other side will say is, I'm sorry, you're applying logic and reason to a situation that I'm feeling emotionally. And so therefore, I'm right because I feel this way. And you're just mean for bringing all that brain power. Okay. You are intellectually privileged or something.
So what you're saying is facts don't care about your feelings.
Hey, I came up with that. I said that years before I knew who Ben Shapiro was, so I feel pretty good about myself.
Well, see, I agree with that statement, but there is regrettably the inverse is also true. Feelings don't care about your facts, and there are people that no matter how many facts, how many absolute undeniable truths you lay in front, factual truths you lay in front of them, they are going to feel that such and such a thing ought to be, and you have to convince them otherwise, by other means, which regrettably is something I'm not very good at. I'm trying to learn, the arts of rhetoric, but it is not something I or most people on the right wing are naturally inclined to, and I think it is a weakness.
Yeah, we need to sell the benefits of logic more. That people are so used to emotion as justification that they need to relearn what logic is actually for and how much it does actually matter.
Well, the problem is it takes a level of maturity to accept the conclusions of logic, because logic will invariably lead you to some conclusions that you disagree with or you just don't like. It's going to lead to unpleasantness occasionally. Like logic leads me to believe that perhaps Dr. Peppers aren't actually good for me. I don't like that. It makes me unhappy.
Or Tide Pods are not part of a natural, wholesome diet.
There you go. Look, guys, when we talk about a cleanse, we mean something else.
Oh gosh.
Will not remove the stains from your soul.
No. If only it were that easy.
Yeah.
So
good stuff.
So this is to cut back to the poem in the penultimate stanza. That's a word I like and don't get to use enough. The penultimate stanza, it has God granted them all things for which they had striven, and the heart of a beast in the place of a man's heart was given. And actually, it's kind of funny because there's in the Narnia Chronicles, C.S. Lewis talks about the idea that some talking animals may have reverted to being non-rational or ordinary animals, and then he says what, and then one of the kids says what might happen if that happened to people, could that happen to humans, and something about how horrible that would be and what would that look like. And it's like you can kind of see, it's hard to it's a scary idea to touch, and it's a scary idea to walk around, and it's not exactly a judgment you want to make on any particular person, but you can kind of see how that happens a little bit, and it talks about the process in this poem and talks about the consequences, and it's just Well,
it's interesting you bring up Lewis. In the final book of sort of the Chronicles of Narnia, right? You see
all the rebellious animals lose their ability to speak, don't they?
Yeah, there's a cat that is actually a spokesperson basically for the devil, and it gets stricken dumb, and everybody's like, "Oh God, that's horrifying." But even after like sort of the last moment has come, right, and basically heaven is unfolding, Aslan is, he's bringing renewal to all these things, and it's washing across like, sort of the multiverse, like this tide. And then you see there are some dwarves that were, basically non-believers. They didn't believe in Aslan. And they're sitting there and they're staunchly denying that, this has come, and they're like, nope. And they cannot perceive that things have been renewed and that things are beautiful. They just see the same little mud hut they were sitting in eating moldy bread, They're like, yeah, nope. I'll never take you in with that foolishness. It's terrible times these days, for sure. While, again, literal paradise has sprung into being around them. That reminds me of a lot of people, complaining today about how, things are terrible, racism, all that. I'm like, do you not see the world we live in? This is an amazing time to be alive. What are you so mad about? And no, they refuse. They want to remember the old days when things were terrible, rather than actually looking around and honestly saying, maybe humanity has come a long way. Heck, since they've been alive, since I've been alive. Phones are no longer things that are chained to the wall. They're things here sitting in front of me helping me talk to a guy in Europe, for God's sake.
Well, and it's what is his it's Louis C.K. I think is the comedian who I kind of in a lot of other ways hate. But he says, everything is awesome, but nobody is happy. And I've seen someone and he has a point, but I've seen someone critique this and say, like, what he's not addressing, like, okay, a strictly accurate and more accurate statement of that would be consumer products are awesome, but no one is happy. Well, has anyone ever said, like, consumer products will produce happiness other than people selling them?
Well, that's the heaven in a bottle message of most adverts, isn't it? So.
Yeah, and so like we have a lot of material prosperity at the very same time that
our souls are starving.
Yeah,
we've developed all of these great gadgets, and we have worked on the improvement of technology, and we've done really, we've done yeoman's work there. We have done a great job as people and as society in making things, making technology and gadgets and machinery and all those things amazing. But we haven't, set any thought in the last, hardly any thought anyway, in the last couple hundred years to really improving our souls and increasing, that part of our lives, increasing sort of the commerce of ideas and, the quality of the things that, we meditate on, because, well, we're doing our very best, and as society, we're doing our very best to kill God. But all we're doing, the sword rebounds off of him because he's unassailable. And all it does is it lands right on our own hearts. And it cuts us in two. And we find ourselves at this strange bifurcation where, whereby we're surrounded by riches and we feel so poor. And yet some goat herder on the Afghan steppe can feel like a very rich man because he's got a beautiful wife and healthy children.
And that's what's the Michael Carpenter from Skin Game. I have a family. I am rich beyond measure. And, of course, all of the villains just like stare at him like, what the heck are you talking about? I can't. This doesn't make sense.
To be fair to them, they were literal demons. So a
couple of them, yeah.
No, like Paul says, I've learned the secret of being content in every situation. That's a major step forward in being happy in life, is learning to be satisfied and grateful. And that is discouraged at every level in our society. Like,
regrettably, that is one of the
so much poverty in the world. There's that poverty is down to the extreme poverty is like down to like, was it 5%, from 50 or whatever it was. There's been massive strides made in reducing extreme poverty and starvation across the world, and yet with it, we in the West are less and less grateful for the things that we have. We're just so accustomed to it. Familiarity breeds contempt, not only in terms of people, but in terms of life situation.
Well, what I'm hearing in all this that we're saying is we need to get more people reading Ecclesiastes, because everybody's trying to hold on to the smoke, the hevel, all this hevel. And, like I said, they're trying to hold on to the smoke of life, and it doesn't work that way, guys. Hold life in an open hand. Don't try, the minute you try and secure something forever, it poofs through your fingers. But if you just walk in it, kind of swirl it a little bit and enjoy it while it's there, let it pass on when it needs to, and there will be more coming. Embrace the time in your life when you're there, while you're in it, and then let it pass away. Don't try and control it so much.
The little parable I heard a long time ago, I forget who said it. It was about when a child is building sandcastles on the beach. They're enjoying the moment. They're enjoying the kingdom they're creating, and they know very well that it's going to be washed away, and they don't mind because they're enjoying it as they're building it. And the fool will say, "I'm going to protect this castle. Nothing's going to happen to it. I've got it forever. Don't you dare come and wash away my castle." Try and say, "This is mine. No one can take this away from me." That the children are being more mature than the adults. The adults think that what they have is theirs forever, and anything happening to it is a disaster.
Well, and at the same time, on the direct opposite side of that, because wisdom what is it? Who is it? There was some quantum physicist, and I can't remember. Niels Bohr, I think, said the opposite of a correct statement is an incorrect statement. The opposite of a profound truth is often another profound truth. And I think what you said there is true, Ben. But there's also, regrettably, the recent example in the news of Notre Dame, and because they were not thinking of themselves, because they were not thinking of what can I get out of this in this moment, because they were thinking of their God and their people and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren down God knows how many generations, they built something beautiful in a way that simply does not happen today.
Yeah.
And
that's true. And I've talked about this with my wife more than once. The Gothic cathedrals, to my mind, are some of probably the most moving monuments to faith in the world, because they were built generationally. Some of those things, my grandfather laid the foundation stones of this thing, and here I am, watching my son, the fourth generation from the man that started. I'm watching him, because I'm too old to do it myself, lay the final capstones. But again, those weren't built to glorify themselves. It wasn't built to say that, hey, it will make me happy. It will make, it will make me, Pierre, the French guy, happy to lay stones in this. Oh, it probably did. It was that this is something that I know I'm not going to get to use when they started building it. I feel like this will not be built in my life. I will be a long dead man. But it's different than saying that I will make this little thing and I will zealously and psychotically guard it. Like I said, this was built for everyone. And this is built in something that serves as something more. And so that's kind of what changes it, from being in the realm of, the ecclesiastical like that on into the realm of, something actually worth putting that kind of effort in. What is it for?
Yeah. The things that reflect on the eternal, they are worth investing in. There are always ways in which we can use our resources that will last beyond the actual duration of the object itself, like the impact that they will have on the people around us, on the people that come after that. The ripples that our acts send out, the little and the small, go well beyond anything we're able to notice. So big projects like that are worth doing. We are able to influence other people in the world through our efforts, our projects, our attitudes to other people as we meet them, like in big matters and small matters. And coming together and doing something like Notre Dame is the ultimate example of someone investing in eternity rather than investing in themselves. And it's always worth doing, and a long forgotten skill in today's culture, unfortunately.
Yeah. And to return to the poem, we are much more at the moment today where they unwound and flung from them with rage as a rag that defiled them the imperial gains of the age which their forefathers piled them. And if you look at the heroes of Western culture, the heroes of I'm American, I talk about the founding fathers of America, and what is being said about them. If they can be, they are brushed aside and forgotten, and if they are too big to be simply forgotten, they are to a one viciously slandered. And it's in terms of like a people, in terms of the survival of a culture, that is just horrifying to watch.
Yeah.
But then again, when you kill God, all you have left is politics.
Yeah.
And politicians, which are a pretty poor substitute.
Yeah. When man is the measure of all things, he becomes a lot less of a man.
Yep. Oh, man. This poem is rough, man. Because it's fun to look and kind of use it as like, yeah, well, you can lead a leftist to water, but before you drown him in it, give him a chance to see reason. But this is, leads you to some kind of places that are pretty grim.
Well, and it's as with all things that matter, as with all great truths, this is kind of just hitting on a theme that we've seen 1,000 times before. I'm a Christian. Hey, let's look at Deuteronomy. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 28. I think it's 28. I could have that wrong, but it's okay, if you follow God, if you adhere to his laws, if you keep his faith, these are all the blessings that will accrue to you. On the other hand, if you reject God, if you violate his commandments, and if you follow foreign idols, these are all the curses that are going to pile up on you. Take a look at that list sometime. See how familiar it sounds.
I really don't want to, that whole facts and feelings thing. No, but you're right. Like I said, and hey, it's put before us, blessing and cursing, life and death. Choose life.
Yeah. Sometimes we forget that the lure of evil seems like it's much stronger than it is, and it always seems like there is no hope to defeat something so massive and inhuman as leftism and socialist mobs and the things. But we have something much greater on our side, and we just mustn't lose sight of that there is hope, not just hope, but a sure hope, because we know how the book ends and we win.
Yes.
That actually reminds me of some parts of the Lord of the Rings, in as Samwise and Frodo are making their way through Mordor, and it's like, okay, they're sheeps, and barbaric enemy soldiers all around, and there's no water, there's no food, and even if we succeed, which is very unlikely, we're both gonna die there. And what answer do they arrive at? There are things much bigger than us. Keep going, give everything you have, and maybe, just maybe, there's this little bit of hope that something better will come out of it. And it's go ahead. Someone was going to say something.
Yeah.
Like with it, I think there's one line where he says that Sam looks up at the stars and sees that he notices that the shadow is just a passing thing. Is one of the most powerful lines in the book. Like when you look at the solar system itself, like there is light flooded from the sun flooding throughout the whole solar system. It's only in the tiny little spots where we're hiding behind a planet that it's actually dark. There's much more light than there is darkness, and as soon as the light appears, the darkness is gone.
That's right. And that's one of the things that, I've been taking solace in this one song that I found. I shared it with, Sean. It's called "Is He Worthy?" and it talks about, the first three lines is, do you feel the world is broken? And then there's a little choral accompaniment to it, says, we do. Do you feel the shadows deepen? We do. But do you know that all the dark won't stop the light from getting through? Then they say, we do. And the whole song is a reaffirmation of basic truths of the faith. And so and Chris Tomlin redid it. I don't like his version as much, but it's still, I'm not going to bash the man. I just don't like his music. Okay. But I feel that it is just the most beautiful song right now for, people who are struggling with hope. Is that, hey, remember all these things, God loves you. His spirit is active on this earth right now. He will one day dwell with us again, and that is his desire, and he will hold us forever. And so no matter what you see in the news, no matter what you read on the internet, no matter what you see happening in front of your very eyes, understand that God works his purpose in this world. And then it is a good purpose. It is blessings. It is peace. And he will, in the end, be victorious. And all we have to do to be a part of that is to serve him and to love others. And that's it.
Yeah, and the glories that await us far outweigh our temporary sufferings in this life.
That's right.
Well, that, despite the rather oblique nature of this poem, that seems like a relatively good place to close on. Any final thoughts from either of you? Ben?
We know that people without God go down this path, and when people find God, they have a chance of getting off it. And that's our main hope, and that's what we try to share with them, that there is another way, there's a better way, and that a way that doesn't end in death, goes beyond.
Nate, any closing thoughts, or was that yours?
Yeah, I think that was all I got today. Just
okay. Well, and I will, of course, provide a link in the description to my performance of the poem, and to Mr. Zwycky's blog, and hopefully to the book Judgment at Moscow.
In Moscow.
Judgment in Moscow.
Yeah, it's
And
available for pre-order right now. I can send you the link.
okay, awesome. Thank you for joining us today, Ben, and
Okay.
God be with you both.
And with you.